Hi, good day, fellow adventurers, and today I come to you with a special video. I have completed my first homebrew class, the Pathfinder 2E Inquisitor, and today I'd like to elucidate my thoughts on the design process of this class and address some of the concerns that I've seen from that other people have given me. So let's just get right into it. When I had envisioned bringing the Inquisitor over to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, I definitely wanted them to be a wisdom-based caster that was also spontaneous. After I saw the Psychic, I knew that this was possible because the Psychic has the ability to choose Intelligence as their key ability score while remaining a spontaneous caster, and because of that, I then believed that any spellcaster, not just charisma-based ones, because as of to this point, every spellcaster that casts spontaneously and not from prepared spell slots is a charisma-based caster. So I definitely like that, and with the release of both Magus and Summoner, I knew that bounded casting was something that I'd like to see with the Inquisitor. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, the Inquisitor shared the same spell progression as both the Magus and the Summoner. They were quote-unquote two-thirds casters, aka they got up to 6th level spells. And I wanted to see that ported over in a way such that they did receive some degree of spellcasting, but nothing too overpowered, like a true 9th or 10th level spellcaster would receive in this game. So I wanted to stay as reasonably true to the original class design. That is, they're still going to be worshipping a deity, they're still going to gain judgment and Inquisitions, and some of the class features that they had in Pathfinder 1, such as Stern Gaze, such as, monster lore, that sort of thing, solo tactics, etc. Also, the last thing I needed was to design them to be offensive in nature. When it comes to the primary divine characters, ones that receive their abilities from a patron deity, the champion, who is focused around defense, and the cleric, who is focused around support and healing, I needed to make the Inquisitor an offensive-based class. That completes, so to speak, the triumvirate of divine characters, and that would make it such that there would be a true niche for an offensive divine class in the game. In addition to that, it also completed another triumvirate, which I had alluded to earlier. Alongside Magus and Summoner, they would be a wisdom-based bounded caster, so that completes the triumvirate of Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. So when I was porting over the Inquisitor, I needed to balance two aspects. The most important aspects of the Inquisitor in Pathfinder 1 were their Inquisitions and their Judgments. In Pathfinder 1E, an Inquisitor could select a domain at level 1, but they would not receive any of the bonus spells provided with that domain. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, clerics did receive one extra spell per level that would be added to their spell list if it wasn't already on it. In the Inquisitor's case, that was not so. They did not receive any extra spells, and their only benefits from the domain was their base bonuses. So you get one at 1st and then one at 8th, more often than not. I knew there were a couple that were outliers, such as the animal domain, which gave you an animal companion at 4th level as opposed to 8th level, but those are more or less few and far between. Most of them were 1st level, 8th level, if I recall correctly. So an Inquisition was an alternate ability that an Inquisitor could gain in lieu of the domain that they would normally receive. Inquisitions were more closely tied into the process of being an Inquisitor and were made specifically for them. Clerics could take them if they so desired, but these were intentionally weaker. They did not provide any bonus spells because Inquisitors would not receive any bonus spells. And the second thing that I needed to port over was Judgment. Judgment was an ability that you could trigger as a swift action, and it would give a certain type of bonus that you selected on cast for 1 minute. It could include extra damage, extra resistance, bonus to hit, certain resistances. There were a lot of different things that you could do with it, but because I wanted to design this as an offensive directed class, I needed to make sure that Judgment provided a damage bonus. So let's start with the Inquisitions. The first idea that I had for them was to make these the subclasses for the Inquisitor, and I think it worked out really well. At the start, I had 4 or 5 different ideas, maybe 6 at one point, but I chopped them down pretty quickly based on how I designed them. So initially, I put Wisdom as the defined key ability score for the Inquisitor, which I realized wasn't the greatest idea as this class was developed. With Wisdom as their key ability score, they were locked into Wisdom as their casting stat. However, based on the subclass, or Inquisition in this case, that they would choose, they could maybe potentially get a different casting stat and a different key ability score as a result of that. So my original draft was the Vigilant Defender, the Preacher, who could choose Charisma as their key ability score and would gain skill training in both Diplomacy and Intimidate, the Sacred Huntmaster, the Umbral Stalker, and then the Monster Tactician, who was all about recalling knowledge, and as a result of that could choose Intelligence as their key ability score, which I thought was pretty cool. But I realized that this was too verbose, and it just kind of put a burden on the chassis, and I would have to balance everything around casting off different stats, and that was a whole mess. And I lost track of the fact that I needed to keep this as an offensive-based class. Having only 4 spells per day due to bounded casting wasn't really going to change much. So as a result of this, I switched their key ability score to either Strength or Dexterity, you could pick. And of course, I didn't restrict this based on Inquisition. So I kept key ability score as Strength or Dex, and I made the Inquisitions give skill training, a focus spell, and I also opened up their domains. So my initial plan for some of the Inquisitions was to give them a domain spell at level 1. And I realized this kind of didn't make much sense because some of the Inquisitions would be getting their own focus spell, a new unique focus spell that I designed, whereas some of them would be getting domains that already existed. And this also proved to be kind of weird, as I wanted them to truly have all either all new or all borrowed. So I decided to go with all new. And what I did from there was remove domain from the equation. And what I instead did was place additional options when you took the feat Domain Initiate, which I gave them as a first level feat choice. Inquisitors do not receive a feat at first level. So I gave different Inquisitions different domains, which would be different potentially from the deity that you selected. So even if an Umbral Stalker was a worshiper of, I don't know, Caden Kalian, let's say, they could still take the Darkness domain even though it's not in his profile, which I think is fitting, it's not too powerful, and it goes in the theme of the class. And the focus spell that they receive would be truly based on their Inquisition. So speaking of the Inquisitions that I finalized, there are 4 of them with plans to expand on this in the future. The first of which is the Holy Tactician, previously Monster Tactician. They receive training in Society, and in addition to that, they focus around aid and they focus around Recall Knowledge. Their first level focus spell gives them a free action Recall Knowledge. On a critical success, they get a bonus to attack rolls if the creature they recalled knowledge on is their judgment. The Iconoclast was really interesting. I guess this is well balanced because I haven't received any complaints on it. When I originally designed the Iconoclast, it was too strong. I had to make some last minute nerfs to keep it in line with the other classes. The first problem that I had with the Iconoclast is that they're a fear-based class, and their focus spell caused fear in addition to potentially immobilizing an enemy on a crit fail, which is fine. In and of itself, that focus spell would be fine. However, where I went astray with this was on a success, they would still be frightened 1, and it synergized a bit too well with one of their later feats, which I won't be delving into, but the synergy would have been very, very apparent and very, very strong. So I decided to nerf it such that it only would cause frightened on a failure. I think there is some wiggle room there to give the failure condition also like a -10 status bonus to move speed. But as it stands, it's currently fine. If it needs a little bit of tweaking, I'll be open to that in the future. The next up was the Umbral Stalker. This class is all about stealth, precision, sort of like a rogue, but more so focused on working in the dark. The first level focus spell gives them dark vision, and enemies that are in dimmer dark light are flat-footed to the Umbral Stalker, which I think is pretty cool. Their later feats involve, around illusion and precision. And finally, there's the Vigilant Defender, who's trained in athletics. They're not a champion, but many of their abilities revolve around teamwork, revolve around protecting allies, that sort of thing. So it is kind of like a champion in nature, but the focus on offense is still there. The focus on making sure that enemies are taking a lot of damage and also protecting your teammates at the same time was a key aspect of this Inquisition. So I gave them feats and other abilities that involved around getting bonuses to armor class, resisting death, reducing damage, that sort of thing. I think the hardest part of designing this class was how I wanted Judgment to function. And immediately, I needed to compare this ability to Divine Lance. Divine Lance is a very... problematic's the wrong word, because it's problematic in a different way. It's not too strong. It's very awkward to use if you are a follower of a true neutral deity. So if you're a follower of Nethys, a follower of Pharasma or Gazre, you wouldn't be able to use Divine Lance, and you'd be out of luck, and your only offensive cantrip other than Daze would be gone. Divine Lance is also sort of problematic in that it does alignment damage, and true neutral creatures aren't affected by alignment damage at all. So that throws another wrench into the problem. So the first thought that I had for Judgment was to make it a one-action concentrate ability. You basically mark a target, and they take extra damage from your strikes. The problem with that is this is exactly Precision Ranger's Hunt Prey. So I had to ditch that idea completely right from the beginning because I knew it would be too close to just being an analog of the Divine Ranger, and I wanted to separate this character from that, even though their primary objective is massive single target damage. The second idea was to make it a focus spell, but it would be competing with their other focus spell, and I didn't want to have them start off with 2 focus points at level 1 for each spell. And then thirdly, if they were a human and took Domain Initiate, then as a result, they could take Domain Initiate as well, and they would have 3 focus points at level 1, which is something I wanted to avoid. So I ended up making it as a focus cantrip. It heightens decently well. And initially, when I had the damage types listed out, I would pick alignment. I definitely wanted alignment in there, but also another type of damage that all Inquisitors could access, and they wouldn't feel bad about this choice. So originally, I had all alignments and fire damage. I think fire is very offensive in nature. Paizo loves fire too, so it would be thematic both to the class and with respect to how the first-party developers make their game. I realized this was a bit too narrow in nature, so I ended up changing that fire part to both positive and negative damage. I think this is still very thematic, very flavorful. For instance, an Inquisitor of Sarenrae, whose objective is to destroy all undead, or same thing we could go with Pharasma, right? Could choose positive damage as their judgment type damage and still do a lot of damage to undead. So as a result of this, true neutral deities would not receive the shaft. They would still be perfectly viable and still be able to deal out a lot of damage, which is pretty good. I didn't forget about other types of damage, though, and I'll go into that in feats, which I believe is coming up next. The slide after this, maybe. So the first thing I wanted to do was loosen the restrictions that deities impose on you. Because you are an Inquisitor, you're not necessarily going to be upfront about how you go about doing your business. You're very much covert, very much want to subvert your true mission, because, well, that's the entire purpose of the class. So I loosened the anathema restrictions that deities impose on you. First and foremost, there is no longer any penalty for casting a spell of the opposite alignment. In my Agents of Edgewatch game, which just concluded, as a matter of fact, our cleric had prepared evil aligned spells despite being neutral good multiple times, not out of malice or out of like power gaming. It was just a genuine mistake because he didn't read the tag. He didn't see the tag that it said, hey, this has the evil trait, you can't cast this. So this loosens the restriction there. However, in the case that you cast too many spells of the opposite alignment, your alignment will change, and if it falls to an alignment to the point where you would no longer be able to worship that deity because it's not an allowed alignment, you would still need to atone or pick a different deity to receive your powers from. So Judgment scales at 9th and 17th levels on its heightened effects, and when that happens, it increases in damage. And that is the same level where you would receive Greater Judgment and True Judgment. Greater Judgment and True Judgment are bonuses that apply when you strike a creature that is affected by Judgment. Similarly to Debilitating Strike that the rogues receive at around the same level. And what this does is it imposes a penalty that you can change every time. There are currently 5 Greater Judgments and 5 True Judgments. The True Judgments are simply improvements on Greater Judgment, so it can inflict Clumsy or Enfeebled, or Stupefied, or reduce your move speed. And when you apply a True Judgment, you can either select 2 Greater Judgments or a True Judgment, which is double the effect of a Greater Judgment, so Clumsy 2, Enfeebled 2, Stupefied 2. And then the Halting True Judgment, which I think was pretty cool. It is minus 20 foot move speed, and they also can't step. So going back to what I alluded to earlier, back to Judgment, you can still do fire damage as a part of Judgment. There's a first level feat called Elemental Judgment, which allows you to choose fire, cold, electricity, acid, or sonic. When I was originally designing Judgment and was still on the whole alignment or fire damage, I was considering if your deity has the cold, lightning, or destruction domain in their profile, they would be able to choose a different type of energy damage based on their deity. And then I realized this is way too cumbersome. Just make it a feat and let them choose the type of damage they wanted to do and call it a day. And I think that ended up pretty well. It's a first level feat, so you could take it as early as level 2 or even level 1 if you have natural ambition. Final Judgment is the last class feature in the list for the Inquisitor, and it is a massive, massive smite that ends Judgment and then does a lot of damage. And I honestly think it might be a little too strong as it stands. It's a 19th level ability, so naturally it should be strong. And the fact that you're missing out on so much bonus damage because you can't cast Judgment on them for another 24 hours. I thought it was fairly balanced, although 20 times 10 is 200. So if you cast Judgment and then use Final Judgment, for the cost of no daily resource, you've just done 200 damage and inflicted stun 1 on a fail. I think that might be too strong. However, this ability was supposed to be designed to be strong. I would definitely be receptive to nerfing this damage to maybe 15. I think anything lower than 15 would be a bit underwhelming for a 19th level class feature, which prevents you from dealing bonus damage. But we'll see in time. If anyone out there is playing an Inquisitor of a 19th level game and has access to this, let me know. Originally, another funny thing. When I sent this out for publication on Pathfinder Infinite, I didn't include the last sentence of Final Judgment. So there was no cooldown on this ability. You could spam this once a turn, which is absolutely hilarious and absolutely broken. I'm really glad that I caught this early, and it's now where it should be. In terms of class feats, there are quite a few. There's over 50 new unique class feats to this class. Many of them are improvements to Judgment. If you take a look at any page of the PDF and take a shot, every time you see the word Judgment, you would die. So there are a lot of bonuses that you can give. They're either meta magic feats or just abilities that apply against a target that is your judgment, or abilities that you can use at the same time as judgment. So one of the first judgment improvements that you get is either a 2nd or a 4th level feat. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it was 2nd. It's a meta magic free action ability called Unerring Judgment, and it makes sure that you never miss with judgment. So if your opponent is concealed, then you just don't need to make the flat check. You automatically succeed at the flat check in targeting them, which is very minor, but it's still very good. And it's still, in my opinion, appropriate to the thematics of the class, and is effectively True Strike, but for the cost of a feat as opposed to a spell slot. There are also a lot of out-of-combat abilities that I gave to the Inquisitor. I think my favorite line is the Mask Aura line. Aura is one of these things that people sort of forget about until they're reminded that it exists. So a cleric and a champion exude auras that grow in strength as they level up. It's like a very weak aura. Sorry, English is hard. A very weak aura at level 1, and then at level 6, 11, and 16, they grow in strength. With a simple first level feat, Mask Aura, the Inquisitor's aura is hidden, and the only way you can detect it is with some sort of divination. There is an 8th level improvement to this feat called False Aura, which is an illusion-based ability, and it allows you to choose a different aura to exude when you make your daily preparations, and you can disable it as a one-action ability, and I think that's very thematic, very flavorful, and it's not too powerful. And in addition to that, there's an even later level feat, which is not part of this chain, but it's part of the class, where you can just choose to be non-detected constantly. You get the ability of a constant 3rd level non-detection, and you can turn it on and off as you please. And then finally, there's a bunch of feats which give you extra focus spells. There's Holy Castigation, which does fire and some sort of alignment damage, or positive negative, I believe. And if you fail the save, you take persistent damage, which is really cool. There's Divine Impression, which is the divine analog to the Magus's Runic Impression, so you can attach an extra property rune to your weapon or unarmed attack. And then finally, the 18th level feat, Divine Juggernaut, which is very similar to the Monk's Key form at 18th level, which gives you a fly speed, dark vision. I'm not sure if this one gives you dark vision, but you get a status bonus to AC and attack rolls, and you get bonus alignment damage or positive negative, and against the morph trait. When I was designing Divine Juggernaut at the very beginning, it prevented you from casting spells other than Judgment, but I removed this restriction because it felt a bit too overwhelming. So instead of making a transmutation polymorph, I made a transmutation morph. You just get the dark vision and the wings. And now we should talk about bounded spellcasting. I really liked how Magus and Summoner were given 4 spells per day. Well, Magus technically gets 6 starting at 7th level, but we'll just ignore that for sake of argument. I definitely think there needed to be a wisdom-based bounded spellcaster, and who else but to give it to then our good old Inquisitor. I think there's definitely the design space for it. I think it fits well, and I think that giving them bounded casting would let them keep their martial abilities without them becoming too similar to the War Priest, a class that only receives expert proficiency in weapons, but it gets 10th level spellcasting as compensation. I think that if I wanted to make them more like the War Priest, I would just tell my players to make a War Priest and leave it at that. But because of bounded casting, I think there is just enough design space to fit the Inquisitor in there. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, the Inquisitor was a spontaneous caster who cast off their wisdom stat, so I wanted to keep that as well. I think if they were casting off charisma, it'd be just a little bit too close to champion, so I wanted to make sure that this distinction was there, and currently every spontaneous caster is already charisma based. In the Dark Archive, when that's released, Psychic will be the first non-charisma based spellcaster because they can choose intelligence as their casting stat, which I think is pretty cool. But as it stands, I really wanted there to be a wisdom-based spontaneous caster just to open up a couple more design points. And one of the first questions that I had received was, why isn't this class only based on their focus skills? Why even give them bounded casting? And this is more so a tradition thing. I wanted them to keep some degree of true spellcasting as they did in Pathfinder 1st Edition. That was one of my favorite parts about them. And I didn't want them to be too similar to classes that already existed. There are already focus spell only classes, and I feel like they would be too close to champion or ranger or monk. Rangers and monks also cast off their wisdom stat. So that was something to keep in mind as well. So there were quite a few concerns about the class that I had received criticism on after this class was released. So the three primary things that I saw on the review of this class on Pathfinder Infinite was about Judgment, Tactical Aid, and Solo Maneuvers. Let's start with Judgment. 1d6 damage on all strikes for a minute is pretty strong, I'm not going to lie, and this ability is given at level 1. With respect to other focus cantrips and other focus spells, this exceeds those abilities by a bit. And I agree that this is a very strong offensive tool, but this should be compared to martial abilities, not necessarily casters. So when I was looking at the Swashbuckler, when I was looking at the Barbarian, when I was looking at the Rogue, I felt like Judgment was in line with their abilities, although on second look, perhaps this ability is a bit too strong. So if you believe that is the case, if you've purchased the PDF and if you've been running an Inquisitor, certainly you might want to reduce the damage from 1d6 to 2, and in addition to that, reduce the heightening effects. Instead of giving them an extra 1d6, just give them an extra 2 damage instead. I don't necessarily think that this is good, because this is an offensive-based class, and having that damage up front is nice to have, but I can definitely see that it might be a bit too overwhelming, especially if you roll a 6 and then crit. That's an extra 12 damage for the cost of a 1-action focus cantrip at level 1, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion. So I think this sort of thing requires more playtesting. I originally had it at 2 damage, but felt as if it was a bit on the low side, considering you can only affect one target at a time. The Magus gets Arcane Cascade, which they activate for one ability as well, and it would only provide half the damage, scaling at similar levels. It scales at 1, 7, and 15, but it applies to every target. It's not just on a single target. So that's what my thought process was when I was designing Judgment. The second thing here is Tactical Aid, which I do believe was too strong on release. The way this feat works was a 1 to 3 action activity that was an analog. That was the Society analog to the Bard's Inspire Competence. You could aid using Society instead of the normal check, and if you were legendary in Society, then you automatically crit succeed on aid. The problem with this was not necessarily with that, but you received an extra action. Sorry, you would receive an extra reaction every turn that could only be used to aid. And if you were a master in Society, then at that point, every time you use an action, it provides 2 aids at once. That was definitely too strong. I removed it. It is no longer in the document as of version 1.1. However, as this action stands, it was compared to Bellflower Tiller. I don't think Bellflower Tiller is necessarily the best archetype in the world. I've glanced over it, and it doesn't seem very impressive to me. So I think that even though this is technically power creep, improving the power of an archetype that wasn't so great in the first place is not a problem. In addition to that, Tactical Aid is only available to the Holy Tactician, so this is just 1 out of 4 Inquisitions. Not every Inquisitor is going to have access to this ability. So as it stands, I definitely think removing the Master Proficiency ability is fine. I already removed it. If you want to keep it in, you do you. But I think as it stands now, Tactical Aid is fine. And finally, the last feat that I saw come under fire was Solo Maneuvers. It's a 4th level feat that inflicts flat-footed on an enemy until the beginning of your next turn. This was compared to the Rogue's Instant Opening at level 14, where it would last till the end of their next turn. The difference between these two features is that Solo Maneuvers only provides its benefits for 2 actions, whereas Instant Opening provides its benefits for 5 actions. If it's to the end of your next turn, you still have the 2 remaining actions on your turn, in addition to that, the 3 actions that you take on the next turn. So Solo Maneuvers, I think, is justified for where it stands. Additionally, Inquisitors don't have sneak attack damage, rogues do, so a rogue with this ability would certainly be broken, because for the cost of nothing, they would be able to inflict flat-footed. Otherwise, rogues would need to feint, or tumble behind if they have that feat, or get flanking in order to proc their sneak attack. So I think this feat is fine where it is. I don't think this feat needs changing. If you think this feat should be a 6th level feat, I'm not going to argue with you there, but my personal belief is that this feat is fine. So I'm not quite done with the Inquisitor just yet. I definitely think there's a lot more design space for more Inquisitions, for more feats. I think I actually forgot to include the expanded domain initiate where they could get the alternate domain ability. I think that was an oversight on my part, and you should definitely open that up to Inquisitors. My bad. I think that if anyone ever gets to level 19 with this class to test out Final Judgment, as it stands, I think it might be too strong, but because I don't have any games that are at 19th level right now where I can play an Inquisitor, I can't really be the judge of that. But if you want to nerf this to 15, I think that's perfectly fine. If you want to nerf this to 10 even, that might be a bit overkill, but we'll see where it goes. I can't be, an oracle about that sort of thing. I can't predict the future and the ultimate power level of this ability. Finally, I think there is room for more Inquisitions. I think that Preacher is something I want to bring back. A more diplomatic-based Inquisitor might be pretty cool, and then have a focus spell and other feats based on that. Maybe give them Bon Mot as a free action whenever you judge someone. And then Sacred Huntsmaster. That was my favorite archetype in Pathfinder 1e, and I wanted to port it over to Pathfinder 2, but I was like this close. But Animal Companion instead of a focus spell was a bit weird, and let's be honest here, just take the Beastmaster dedication. And it's more or less the same effect. However, an animal being able to inflict judgment damage on another creature is pretty cool, and giving an alignment to an animal, which is normally incapable of morality and is always true neutral, would also be something to toy around with. And I want to take a deeper look at Pathfinder 1e. I want to see what other abilities I can port over to Pathfinder 2. I think Hex and Hammer was something that I was looking at, giving Inquisitors witch hexes. Might be an interesting idea, but it's up in the air right now. I'm focusing on other things at the moment, so this is kind of on the back burner, but I definitely want to come back to this. Pathfinder Infinite is where you can find this playtest. It's not a play where you can find this document. It's $10. And it's been the most popular product on there for quite a few days. I think it's currently number 2, which is still awesome, but getting this back to number 1 would be even more awesome, obviously. Final Judgment now reads properly. There is the 24-hour cooldown, which I remembered to include, and Tactical Aid no longer provides an additional benefit by being a Master in Society. As more people purchase this product and playtest it, I would be very open to reception, so you can give me feedback. I'm always listening. Whether or not I actually implement the change is another story, but as it stands, I am more than I am more than open to receiving criticism and seeing what people like, what people don't like, and then making changes accordingly. So what's next for me, and what's next for my career on Pathfinder Infinite? I do want to release a bunch of Animal Companion compendia. I already have the first one ready to go. I have to talk to my editor about that one, but I want to include more Animal Companions. I think there's definitely a lot of design space left there. I think there are quite a few designs animals that Paizo has not yet included, such as the penguin, such as the stag. The stag's a big one. Elephant, rhino, hippo even. I think there's quite a lot of room left there. And right now I am sort of in the process of making a new class. It is probably even more powerful than the Inquisitor, but I would be more than happy to nerf it to make it a balanced experience that people would enjoy. Right at the bottom is a sneak peek of a feat that I've included. It's called Body Slam. It's a press ability, one action press. You make an unarmed attack using your strength modifier, and you deal an extra circumstance bonus to damage based on your armor's bulk, which I think is very thematic and very cool at the same time. So that's it for me. If you have any questions for me, feel free to let me know in the comment section. Feel free to ping me on Discord. My username is comatthew6, hashtag 5404. Feel free to message me on YouTube, on Twitch. I don't have a Twitter because I'm addicted to doom scrolling and I needed to get that negativity out of my life. But I really do appreciate you spending the time to watch this video and just listen to my thoughts on the Inquisitor. I had a lot of fun making this class, and to see so many people interested in using one of their games just meant the world to me. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to listening to your comments, what you liked, what you didn't like. Let me know, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day.